Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and this is a fans-only episode where not everybody gets a chance to log on and ask me questions during the live stream, so people will send them via direct message on Twitter or send me emails, and I like to answer them every so often. So if you want to get on the show, but you can't join the streams to ask questions, that's a great way to do it. At Matthew Coller on Twitter, my DMs are open, or MatthewColler@gmail is a great place to send me a note there, and I'll get you on the show. So let us start out with Bradley, who says, die on the hill for one prospect the Vikings should absolutely want. Who you got? So I know what you're thinking is that, oh, here he goes. He's going to make the Luther Burden argument again. He's going to talk about wide receiver again. And hey, it's a good argument. So if you got a good argument, you should use it over and over. All right. And Luther Burden is the tackle breaking wide receiver out of Missouri. And I can't help but envision what it would look like if the Vikings could add Jefferson, Addison, Hockenson, and a wide receiver that they could throw underneath passes to and get yards after catch. It's a pretty good idea to surround J.J. McCarthy with as much talent as they possibly can. And hey, we're only a couple years away from Jordan Addison and his rookie contract running out. Wide receiver twos are already getting $22 million a year these days. You've heard the debate that I've thrown out there to a bunch of people, but I won't die on that hill. Here's why. I wouldn't criticize the Vikings for not doing it, right? They could draft a receiver next year. They can draft and develop one in the later rounds. This draft also has some very compelling wide receiver options in the third round. So, I think that it's not a hill to die on, because if they don't do it, I will understand. And they could take some swings and see if they can find another player to bring into that role slowly and to pair with Jalen Nailor. And they don't really have to address this right away. But there are a few players that I have started to feel, the more research I do, the more I read, that would be absolutely fantastic fits for the Minnesota Vikings. So I'll give you a couple of them. Number one is Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia. This guy, high intelligence, plays in different spots, has really impressive movement skills, playmaking, tackling. Intelligence is really something that's talked about big time with him. And a safety, I wrote about this over at purpleinsider.football. There's been a lot of safeties that the Vikings have found and developed into very good players. We've seen it happen with Josh Metellus, Cam Bynum, Andrew Sendejo, Anthony Harris. But if you're looking for a game changer, well, they've had the game changer in Harrison Smith. And those are not as easy to find. And Malachi Starks has the potential to be that player. Not that anyone should set the bar at Harrison Smith when you draft them, but there's some traits in there for Malachi Starks that are similar. He's also pretty young, so he's someone that you could draft and you could develop, but while playing, mixing in with someone like Theo Jackson, who we know they like, and Josh Metellus. And then when Harrison Smith someday finally decides to call it quits, that would be a nice player to slide right into that role with the other guys like Jay Ward and like Theo Jackson that they have been developing over the years. So that would be the first one. If he ends up there on the board, the Minnesota Vikings should very, very strongly consider him. Now, there's a lot of other players that I kind of like if they took, and I could see the fit and say, oh, well, like a Trey Amos from Ole Miss. I think he's the best fit for the Vikings. Siobhan Ravel is another guy who's very interesting and is apparently visiting the Vikings on one of their 30 visits. And he's got a high ceiling and great athletic traits, but tore his ACL, which might bring down his draft stock a little bit, enough for the Vikings to potentially take a look at him. Those are not as strongly as I feel about Malachi Starks, but the other one is Gray Zabel, the offensive tackle, but will likely be moved inside from NDSU. And the reason I like it so much is the high athletic ceiling, but you don't have to play him right away. Because Blake Brandel is there, you can have a competition, you can develop Zabel until he's ready to go. And it does take time for interior linemen to develop, but should he win the job right away, you'd be talking about someone who is a better athlete than the Vikings have had at that position. So I don't even know when. I literally don't know the last athlete of that caliber. Maybe it was Steve Hutchinson. When we go through all the years and the guards that they have drafted, Ed Ingram would not qualify on the same caliber. He was a high draft pick, Ezra Cleveland was a tackle that moved inside. There's a question about that later, but Zabel is somebody that I think they could draft, could potentially win the job now and be a difference maker with his athleticism and the way they run the football. And plus, he was an absolutely dominant pass blocker at the tackle position. I know that the caliber of players he was going against were not in the NFL, but we did see in the Senior Bowl him match up against some really good prospects and hold his own. So I have become a Gray Zabel enjoyer. A guard, a safety, not usually positions that I would be dying on the hill for, but those two stand out to me specifically as because the Vikings could get the best player on the board at those positions. That intrigues me for a back end of the first round where everybody in front of you is drafting tackles, receivers, quarterbacks, the things that you don't really need, and you sit there and wait and get the number one player on the board. It's hard to say whether the Vikings like Zabel or whether they would like Tyler Booker more, who is a beast. He's got great tape. He's an absolutely enormous dude, but I am a little bit concerned about what happened at the combine. I think raw athleticism does matter, and history has not been kind to interior linemen that don't do well in some of those quickness drills because it's a fast league. It is a quick league where you have a lot of DTs that are getting smaller and faster, not bigger and slower. So that scares me a little. Of course, if the Vikings draft him, I think everyone would be happy. But because I have that concern, I have less concern about Zabel making that transition from NDSU to the NFL than I would about Booker and some of the indicators from the combine. But no draft pick that you get at the back end of the first round is ever going to be without some sort of asterisk to him of, well, he's got a question about this, that, or the other thing. But Starks, Zabel, those are the two guys that after, I don't know how long we've been doing this, weeks of research and lots of draft simulations and reading what everybody has to say about the prospects, those are two of the fits that I really like the most. On to the next question. This comes from Wade. Says, is there anything to the Asante Samuel steam as far as you can tell? Any other signings we might reasonably expect once the compensatory pick window is closed? I don't know about the Asante Samuel steam. I don't really even know what steam exactly there is, other than it makes logical sense for the Vikings to look at another cornerback in free agency who's still remaining. Number one, because there are good cornerbacks still remaining. And I agree with Mike Zimmer. And this is why I would also still make the argument for drafting one, despite us finding out that Brian Flores really loves Isaiah Rodgers. I mean, Isaiah Rodgers is played 500 snaps one time in his career, and he's 27 years old. And he also has been suspended once. That to me is not lock it in, set it and forget it. The only set it and forget it guy that they have is Byron Murphy Jr. So you can never have too many of those. And I really like their approach, which is to take a lot of swings. Take a swing at Isaiah Rodgers, the third rounder, Mekhi Blackman from 2 years ago. Take a swing at a third rounder that you really like. Try to develop him. And I'm sure he was developing behind the scenes last year, but mixed in as a 400 to 500 snap player in 2023. But again, not somebody you would say, oh yeah, lock him in, good to go. He's your starting guy for a long period of time. And then they've rolled the dice on Dwight McGlothern, who Kevin O'Connell mentioned, and we know that they like, and someone like Jeff Okudah, why not? It costs you almost nothing, and the guy's a former draft pick. If they did the same thing, a very high draft pick, if they did the same thing with Asante Samuel, I mean, by all means, go ahead. I mean, it's not going to cost a whole heck of a lot. Bring in as many corners as you got. I think corners can be unpredictable, and I think they get injured a lot just based on the nature of that position. Those guys are asked to come up and tackle people full speed, jump way up in the air. Like, there's just a lot that can happen. And so if you tell me, oh yeah, they're going to add a corner, I'm never going to tell you no. But as far as whether there's something to whatever's being said out there, that I do not know for sure. I guess we'll all find out once that compensatory window ends. I mean, I think the obvious answer here is quarterback, backup quarterback, that they have somebody on the line, I would assume, whether it's Flacco or it's Wentz or whoever it might be. There's only a handful of guys that are left that have actually played in the NFL. One of them will be a Minnesota Viking. I do not know which one. And anybody else out there who fits the bill like Asante Samuel Jr., anybody. It could be any position. You want to get one more guard? Hey, someday, I'm going to keep saying it, Will Hernandez will play for this football team. But one more guard to compete with Blake Brandel. If you're not going to draft Gray Zabel or Tyler Booker in the first round, then you could use another body in there, because right now it's Michael Juergens, and that's kind of it on the interior for competition. Maybe they'll move Walter Rouse inside, especially after going out and getting a veteran like Justin Skol to be their swing tackle for next year. So there's not a lot of competition at those guard positions, and you got two guys there that are starting, and really one proven backup. Maybe Dalton Reister comes back for another bite at the apple here with the Vikings to compete, but some other guard, some other depth on the offensive line would be good. Maybe Keenan Allen, if he wants to play football. Is anybody going to tell him no? I wouldn't. That guy has destroyed the Vikings every time he's played him. So there are a couple wide receivers even who are veterans still out on the market, and maybe Keenan Allen would like to have a quarterback who can find him and throw him the football. And I like that as an underneath option. As always, more options are good, but somebody who can get open in short areas. He was still getting open last year. Just Caleb Williams wasn't really getting him the football. So there are a few options. And hey, a linebacker, backup linebacker, they brought back Eric Wilson, but you'd like a little more depth there. Maybe another safety in there. I mean, really almost any position you could say, hey, one more guy would be helpful here. A journeyman running back who might fill out the room. There is a decent number of players in free agency who are still out there that you could see them looking at. And if it's not Asante Samuel, maybe Rasul Douglas at corner. He's had a pretty good career, 31 years old. So options, and the Vikings have enough cap space to add a couple of those guys if they would like to do so. Guys, if you watch the show all the time, you know that I'm a hat guy. But if you're wearing hats to cover up for your hair loss, then I've got something that can help you. It's called Hims. If you've lost your hair, that doesn't mean you can't find it again. Try Hims Hair Loss Solutions, and you'll be joining hundreds of thousands of subscribers who have found their hair again. Hims makes treating hair loss simple with clinically proven ingredients that can regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. Choose from personalized chewable, oral, spray, or serum treatments to find what works best for you. The process is simple and 100% online, so there are no uncomfortable doctor visits. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/Purple Insider. That's HIMS.com/Purple Insider for your personalized hair loss treatment options. Him.com/Purple Insider. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See the website for full details and important safety information. All right, next question from Griffin. Do you think KOC's comments of essentially best player available is nice, but we want them to be on the field as well? Change what you think the Vikings' focus will be on for their first round pick. It does not. It does not change what I think they'll focus on, because we all know what he's talking about. I mean, number one, I think he was addressing a little bit of my obsession with the idea of drafting a wide receiver. It's not too easy to get on the field when you have Jefferson, Addison, Hockenson, and they still like Jalen Naylor a lot, and they should. But it's not the easiest to get 100 targets as a Minnesota Viking. Though I'll throw out this stat. It's KOC if you're watching. KJ Osborne, in the year 2022, was the wide receiver 3. He had 90 targets. I'm just saying, he had 90 targets. So sometimes that wide receiver 3 is pretty valuable, but that's not the point. I never thought that they were looking at wide receiver 3 in the first round anyway. I would have figured that it would be a depth thing, that they take a swing at somebody, maybe even someone who can kick return, because it's clear the NFL wants a lot more kick returns and they got nothing out of their punt returns last year. So maybe something like that. But I mean, we're talking about positions like tackle, tight end. I mean, the guy from Michigan, the tight end, is a phenomenal prospect, but you can't pick him. He would never play. There's 2 really good tight ends in front of him, and you're not going to pick him to be your tight end 2 after Josh Oliver's contract runs out. It just doesn't make sense. You are not drafting an edge rusher. You have Van Ginkel, you have Grenard, you have Dallas Turner. You're not going to spend 2 years in a row with that big of an investment. Think about the money they spent and the draft pick to rebuild that position. You're not going to pick something there Linebacker is a little more interesting because of the way Brian Flores uses it, but even then, 2 linebackers on the field, you have 2 linebackers and a third one in Eric Wilson who can play. Not super likely, even if it's the best player available. And I think that was his point, more than trying to give us like a hint, hint, wink, wink, nod, nod of who they're going to draft, but more, hey, we can all use our common sense here. Safety is open, guard is open, cornerback for me is always open, and wide receiver is maybe a bit of a wild card. Defensive tackle, in my mind, is also open because it's a rotational position. So Philly can draft a Milton Williams, play him 500 snaps, and then he gets $26 million. But you could do that with Derek Harmon. You could do that with Walter Nolan. You know that those rotational positions are always going to be able to get onto the field. And also, how much longer do you have Harrison Phillips here and things like that? So they could look at a Kenneth Grant or a Tyleik Williams if they wanted somebody to kind of be the sun that everybody else rotates around kind of thing, stuffs that middle. If they wanted to, you could definitely do it. But it didn't change what I think of that. I mean, I think any of us could make a list of our top positions of need, and maybe your order would be a little bit different than my order. Maybe you like the idea of a tackle, or a guard or a defensive tackle higher than I do, and I like safety better. But I think we all kind of know the big 4 or 5 positions that the Vikings should be looking at in the first round. Let's get to this one. Comes from Tim. Tim says, what do you think of Minnesota drafting the Notre Dame safety Xavier Watts with the 24th pick? I watched all the Notre Dame games this year and every year, and this kid was versatile and very football savvy. Is a safety a reach at 24? So this is just my understanding. And I watched Xavier Watts play a bit as well. Not as much as you. You watched every game, so you know more about what he looks like on the field than I do. But my process is usually reading what all the draft analysts have to say, the people who watch the film and do the scouting. And I like Xavier Watts as one of those players if they were to trade down, or if he was available in the 3rd round, a little bit more than taking him at 24. So at least my understanding is, and this is the way I like to frame it because I didn't make a big board, I didn't watch 500 players. I don't know what I'm looking at, the difference between Xavier Watts and Malachi Starks. I'm not a scout. So I trust the people in the aggregate, especially with the consensus boards and things like that, that ultimately the wisdom of the crowd will give us the best snapshot we can get. And in that snapshot, Xavier Watts is more of a 2nd round type of prospect. The Vikings do not have a 2nd round pick, so this would be if they were trading down or if he's available in the 3rd round, which is very possible. My feeling on Xavier Watts is that the upside is not quite the same. He's a playmaker. He's got a ton of interceptions. That does not happen randomly. Even in college football where the quarterbacks aren't so good, you just don't pick off, 13 passes in 2 years because the ball floats right into your hands. So there's clearly something there, and I love production. If you're drafting players, pick guys that got production. I do not like to hear, well, the reason he didn't catch any passes was, or the reason he never got any pass breakups was. That's always concerning to me. I know there's one Danielle Hunter, but there's only one Danielle Hunter who didn't get a lot of sacks in college and then did it in the NFL. So you're talking about the type of guy that I would really like. But if his projections have him mostly in the middle of the 2nd round as that kind of level prospect, then he's a trade down and draft candidate, or he's somebody that maybe you could see if he slips through the cracks and eventually gets there. It would be surprising to me if they took him at 24, but we kind of have all agreed on this, and I'm with it. If Brian Flores says, no, that's the guy, then that's the guy. Then that's the guy that we're going to believe will fit in the Brian Flores system because he has such a good eye, especially for defensive backs, a position he came into the league scouting, a position that he coached for a long time. So if he likes Watts as much as Nick Imaware or Malachi Starks, who are projected as top 20 players, top 25 players, okay, I would be down with it. And as far as the safety position goes, I think because of Flores' defense, because what he asks of the safeties, and he was a guy that drafted in Miami, Javon Holland, because he knows what he asks of those safeties. You got to be a pass rusher. You got to be a linebacker. You got to be a nickel corner. You got to be a deep guy. Starks really fits that description a little bit better than some of the other guys. But I think Watts, being the playmaker that he is, they could really like that production. So I'm not against it. I'm just saying that the outside world, the draft analyst universe, does not seem to see him as quite high of a level of prospect enough to spend number 24 on. Could change just because, look, we're talking about a team with 4 draft picks, so it could change where, yeah, this guy's supposed to go number 40, but we can't wait till number 40, so let's just take him now. But not out of the question. I would say not out of the question, and I like the player. Isaac emailed to say, Andrew Van Ginkel is a dog. I agree with that. Dallas Turner is Van Ginkel except swap dog with Tracy. Kind of a tweener where he can play edge and off ball, but is not great either. Well, so I think when it comes to Dallas Turner, we're just going to have to wait and see what Dallas Turner actually is. When he came out, I thought he was going to be a pure edge rusher, and I did not think of him as traitsy because he was very productive in college. And when you use that word, I think of someone who just has a lot of tools that usually translate into the NFL and not necessarily refined or not necessarily the production in college, but he was one of the top producers of sacks and pressures at Alabama, a program that tends to produce a good player too here or there. I don't think they're exactly the same type of player because Dallas Turner has much more of a physical upside coming out in the draft. Now, Andrew Van Ginkel has maximized it. He's strong. He's quicker than maybe they thought he was coming out of the draft when he was a 5th round draft pick out of Wisconsin. But he was somebody that really took time and needed to develop. And I think with Dallas Turner, it's going to be the same thing. That when you already have Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard, you're not going to put Dallas Turner in over those guys when one is a top 3 guy in pressures and the other guy's second team All-Pro with multiple pick sixes and double-digit sacks. I mean, where were you going to play him? You could say over Patrick Jones, but Patrick Jones had been playing in the system for a couple years, veteran player, and they also asked Jones to rush into the middle a lot. And I don't think that rushing up the middle was really Dallas Turner's thing. So his role is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out this year. But I wouldn't say Dallas Turner isn't a dog. I mean, I think if you go back and look at his just the scouting reports when he was coming out, there was a lot of that, like a high IQ player, driven. So I'll have to take a look at some of the old reports. Maybe I'm misremembering there, but I didn't think that he was just soft and traitsy or something. I think what happened was he was behind 2 other players that were just thriving and stayed completely healthy for the entire year. Remember, Van Ginkel went out for a handful of series and Turner came in against Indianapolis, played really well. He had a lot of flash plays down the stretch in a unique role that was a little bit different, but we might not see him. I don't know what's going to happen with Van Ginkel's future, but we might not see him really play a 1,000 snap type of role for a couple of seasons. And Brian Flores has said he's okay with that. I think Turner needs to put on weight. Last year, he looked to me like he had lost a lot of weight from the beginning of the season, which happens to a lot of players. It's not a JJ McCarthy thing. Is he injured or whatever? It happens to a lot of players over the season, but you learn as you go on how to keep that on with your workout schedule throughout the year. And I just thought he needed to learn how to beat offensive tackles at the NFL level, which takes time. And I'll just keep bringing this up. There was a study on it in 2020 by Timo Risky of PFF who found that the least productive position as rookies was edge rusher, pass rusher. So let's give Dallas Turner some time before just saying, well, he's a soft version of Van Ginkel. Hey, Van Ginkel, how many years did it take him to become this version of himself? You just have to give young players time to develop. I know everybody wants to call it, oh, he's a bust or whatever. Like, we just don't know. So why don't we give it time and we'll see what Dallas Turner becomes this year. And then we'll have a much better idea of what he's going to be. It might not work out, but I'm not going to try to call it right now. Patrick also has a Van Ginkel adjacent question. Says, do you think that we will see a Van Ginkel extension before or during the season? And a second question, odds that they are saving some cap money to re-sign Stephon Gilmore in August. I would be surprised if they brought back Stephon Gilmore. I would not be surprised if Gilmore just decided to hang it up. And he's not the type of guy to put out some big statement, probably. I think he just would not play, and that would be it for Stephon Gilmore. He's a quiet guy. But I don't know if he wants to keep it going after last year. He played really well, played on a 14-win team, had a lot of fun, and made some extra dough to go along with his earnings for his career. He's had an incredible career. I don't know if it's quite Hall of Fame, but it's borderline, or it's Hall of Very Good at least. I don't know if he wants to play or not. At this moment, the Vikings have seemingly replaced the Shaq Griffin and Stephon Gilmore roles with Mekhi Blackmon coming off the ACL injury and Isaiah Rodgers, but you never know what's going to happen. I mean, they're trying to develop Dwight McGlothern, and it seems that they really like what they see there. That position has a good number of players at this moment, but things can change in an instant, as we know from what happened with Mekhi Blackmon last year. He was in line to be the starter, and then he ends up getting injured on the first day. So we'll see. I don't know what's in Stephon Gilmore's head, but not against it. If he wants to come back, he played pretty well, and clearly speed is not really required, or top speed is not really required to play that position well in Brian Flores' defense. As far as Van Ginkel, yeah, that's an interesting question, because they may want to figure out what they want to see from Dallas Turner first before they decide. But also, if they just said to Andrew Van Ginkel, hey, let's get something done here. Let's get a 2-3 year contract worked out, an extension for you. Make sure you're a Minnesota Viking for a long time. Everyone would be on board with that. I don't know anybody would be against. I mean, already the guy I think is one of the most popular Vikings, because look at the way he plays. Look at how he's used. You see the hair go flying around out there, but just the uniqueness of him, the playmaking ability that he has, it's very, very different from pretty much any player that I could say that I've covered, with the fact that he can play in coverage, play at linebacker, inside linebacker, outside linebacker, doesn't really matter. And you can ask him to do pretty much anything. But here is the issue with giving him an extension. If Andrew Van Ginkel has another year of 11 and a half sacks and 2 or 3 interceptions, whatever number of picks or pass breakups, or scores well by PFF and coverage grade, I mean, what is he worth? Is he worth like $25 million in free agency for somebody else to bring him in? $20 million? Like, how much is this extension costing? And that's why you drafted Dallas Turner, because the surplus value, if the guy hits, is enormous. It's so hard to go into free agency and find edge rushers. How many edge rushers this year in free agency signed? I can't remember too many that signed for big dollars in free agency. They just don't come available that often. So if you're Van Ginkel and maybe you want to be a Viking for life and you want to work something out with the Vikings, and you say, let's get this done. But also, and look, he grew up a Vikings fan. He's from Iowa, all that sort of stuff. That only goes so far when somebody else on the free agent market next year, if you have a good season, might give you $25 million. So we will see on that matter. I'm sure that they're going to have that discussion. And this franchise does have a way of convincing people to stay around, both by working out the financial details fairly and also the culture that they have built. Let's see. Ben says, with the schedule coming out just around the corner, what's a team that you look at and say the Vikings should beat them by 2+ scores? 2+ scores. I mean, this team loves to play close games, Ben. Conversely, what's a team you look at and say if the Vikings beat them, they would be contenders? Yeah, the order of operations does matter here, because let's say you have a week 1 game against a really good team and you beat them. Well, I mean, it's week 1. We're not going to say, oh, they're contenders now. They beat Baltimore in week 1 or something. I think there's lots of options for that second one. And maybe the biggest is Philadelphia. It's just, this. If the Eagles have been that big scary monster that the Vikings have struggled to take down, whether it was 2023, fumbling that thing out of the back of the end zone, the 2017, they did beat them in 2018 and 2019, but it's been a clash, a bit of a rivalry there with Philly, and they won the Super Bowl. They're the best team in the NFL roster-wise. If you beat the Philadelphia Eagles, maybe if it's in the middle of the season, wherever it might be, depends on how they're playing, but if you beat the Super Bowl champs, yeah, people are going to pay attention. And I would say the same thing for Detroit. The Vikings need to beat Detroit at some point. Who thought that would ever be a sentence that someone would say with their face? Gosh, the Vikings really need to find a way to beat them Detroits. Huh? I mean, think about all the times we kind of laughed at Detroit. Oh, well, Matt Patricia's over there. Wayne Font's team can't keep up with the Denny Green Vikes. I mean, how many times did Mike Tice beat them? They were just always there as a punching bag for the Vikings. Wayne Font's had some good teams back in the day, but a lot of times for so many years, even for Mike Zimmer, not that many losses against the Detroit Lions. And especially after they moved on from a very good coach in Jim Caldwell. And here we are saying Kevin O'Connell can't get an edge here on Dan Campbell. They need to beat Detroit. And if you beat Detroit, you beat Philadelphia, Baltimore, those teams, then yeah, you are pretty legit, or some combination of those teams. As far as teams on their schedule that they should absolutely blow the doors off, there's only really one that comes to mind because they're super bad, but there's probably two that come to mind. One is Cleveland. I don't care who they draft. If they're playing Kenny Pickett against Brian Flores, yeah, that should be a couple scores. And the New York Giants. Russell Wilson trying to run around, trying to identify defenses. He struggled against Mike Zimmer to identify defenses, and that was when he was actually good. So not having a whole lot to work with there other than Malik Neighbors. Their offensive line is still problematic against the Vikings D-line, which is overhauled. The interior pressure. I mean, those are a couple that should be hands down Vikings wins. And if they're not, then you got some problems. But we'll see how the schedule plays out. I'm always excited when it comes out. I love to do the show, do that first pick of the schedule. It's always great. So I can't wait for that after the draft. Next question comes from Ale. Wanted to get your thoughts on this and hoping you'll address it on the show. Well, you're lucky, Ale. Here we go. Listening to your top 5 stick and pick players, and I know you've been a huge Zabel guy, but I look at him and see Ezra Cleveland, small school tackle with elite athleticism that gets kicked inside. To me, Ezra Cleveland isn't a first-round pick. What am I missing? So the biggest thing I would say just to start is they're two different people. I get it. We do this in sports. We see one guy who has some things that are similar to another guy, and we go, see? But that would kind of not be that different from saying that, hey, Malachi Starks, it's a Georgia safety. It's just like Lewis Cine. And I mean, okay, we all know that Starks has been used differently by Georgia and has maybe a different IQ profile. I don't know what it was with Lewis Cine. If we said that I thought he was high IQ coming out. I mean, Lewis Cine had a great college career and it didn't work out. So it's easy to say, well, a Georgia safety didn't work out. A small school tackle moved inside. It didn't work out. It kind of worked out, but it didn't work out right to be worth a first round pick. The issue I thought with Ezra Cleveland is that he never really had the violence of a guard, that he was more of a finesse type of player, and that would get him sometimes. And he never really learned to understand the twists and the stunts and how to deal with them. And this could be an issue with Gray Zabel because things are happening a lot faster at the NFL level. But let's all remember too, with Ezra Cleveland, they did that thing that they do, right? They draft him, they put him at right guard. So you're asking him to move all the way across the other side of the line. Then they move him to a left guard, and then you're saying, and they never really get settled. And then by the time he starts coming into his own a bit, they send him packing and they replace him with a guy who's kind of the same guy in Dalton Reisner, but just a little bit better at identifying, those stunts and twists and everything. And I guess Reisner is another guy who didn't go to the biggest college and has had a good career for himself as a starter, but probably, like you said, not necessarily a first round caliber type of player. So I'm sure that there is history, and some people have brought up, well, this NDSU guy worked out, but these other guys haven't. And I don't really try to draw from that stuff because I'm not sure how relevant it is. I always think of the Ohio State quarterback problem of, well, this guy failed and that guy failed from Ohio State. So CJ Stroud, he's just the next failure Ohio State. Oh, no, he's not. I mean, so I kind of look at the same thing. I get where you're coming from, and we all try to do this around draft time, but I look at Zabel as having a lot of edge to his game. I never saw that with Ezra Cleveland. What I saw from Ezra Cleveland was a guy who looked like a tackle playing guard. But I think that Gray Zabel has been prepared for a long time to be a guard and a guard only. And I think we were all perplexed, and hey, all's well that ends well, right? With Christian Darrisaw being here. But I think we were all perplexed at them spending the draft pick on Ezra Cleveland and never even trying him at offensive tackle. So I don't think that was ever in his cards, whereas Gray Zabel, it seems to have been written in the stars for him to play guard for a long time, rather than, hey, you're drafted. Oh, by the way, kid, you're not playing your position. I think maybe set up a little bit for failure, but I just see a different get off, quickness, violence, attack mentality in Zabel, which makes me like him and like him for the inside. But it's a fair question and that's what I keep going back to always with late first round type of picks. We're always going to have questions. There's probably 5 guys in this draft where you go, okay, that guy, franchise player, like, hey, he might bust, but he could be great. That's your Travis Hunter type of player. That's your Abdul Carter. But once you get past maybe the top 10, 15, you're always talking about, well, there's going to be some questions about this guy, but I don't equate those two and say, well, because that failed, I would stay away from the other thing. I just like that he is a top-notch athlete who plays with serious aggressiveness, looked good at the Senior Bowl against some high-level talent, and I think if he was put into a line with a former first-round pick in Ryan Kelly, who's a big, giant beast, who is very experienced, and then a violent guy at right guard, 2 of the best tackles in the league. What I'm looking for is the upside of this thing, as that this offensive line is one of the best in the NFL. That's the upside of the thing if it works out. So that, I think Zabel's got a big upside. Another offensive line question. This comes from Todd. Says, here's a solution at left guard. I would sign Jedrick Wills and ask him to compete at the left guard position with Blake Brandel. He projects out as a 9.56, you mean relative athletic score guard, which is 95th percentile, and could play offensive tackle in a pinch. His PFF scores are not great, but would be a great backup. He's exactly the type of player where I go, okay. I mean, sure, that's a good idea, I guess. If Jedrick Wills wants to play guard, and if they feel like he's healthy enough, he's had some serious issues with injuries through the years, and it kind of has a little bit as a high draft pick. It has a little bit of that Mekhi Becton type of curve of, wow, it looks like this guy's a total bust, and whoa, okay, he found the right spot. I like taking lots of swings. There are positions to me that are just, you don't really know until the guy gets there, so take a shot, and corner is one of them. All the corners. You want Jeff Okudah? Great. You want Jedrick Wills? Great. Just the odds aren't good, but the upside is potentially there and the investment is usually low. The Vikings have shown a propensity to want to do that. A couple more questions here. Jeremy says, how would you describe what Flores is looking for at nose tackle? Harrison Phillips certainly gets it done inside, but doesn't look like the prototype guy. He's more of a D end for me. I would love to add a big 320 plus guy in the middle to provide stout run defense and push the pocket with power. It's a lot of football there, Jeremy. A lot of football. I look at Harrison Phillips as being versatile in that role. He is not the weight that you're talking about for a Gilbert Brown, a Pat Williams, one of those humongous beasts, which is what you want at that position. But I do think that Harrison Phillips can handle centers, can take up multiple blockers, and what he's really good at, and this is something you could go check it out. Just Google Harrison Phillips and Purple Insider, and or maybe defensive tackles and Purple Insider. You'll find it. It's an article I did with Harrison Phillips about how it's tough for PFF to grade the Vikings defensive tackles, he thinks, because they do a lot of stuff that a lot of teams don't do. A lot of teams will line up their nose tackle right over the center and they'll just drive into guys. And what he was talking about is how, and you can watch it on tape, it's actually kind of cool, they are body movers sometimes, where Harrison Phillips might start shaded on one side of the center and then immediately jump to the other side when the snap happens. And he might get pushed back a little, but the blockers follow him, and that creates gaps for linebackers. It's a really interesting way of doing it. So it's not always big giant dude pushes lots of bodies. However, I think that what you're onto is, this is why I've liked the Kenneth Grant idea if it comes up, is that Harrison Phillips can also play that 5 technique or the 4-eye. If we want to get super football-y, that just means, over the guard. or right over the tackle, kind of directly in front of him. He can move out a little bit into that Jonathan Bullard type of role if you have somebody else that's that big beast on the inside. And if you had a Kenneth Grant to go along with a Hargrave, to go along with Harrison Phillips, to go along with Jonathan Allen, that's a lot of dude in there. That's a lot of really, really good football player and a lot of talent and a lot of size and a lot of nasty on the inside. So I'm not against it for sure. I think that Phillips can play this role if they need him to, but if they went out and got one of those guys, if there's even a Tyleik Williams, if they maybe traded down, I think the Vita Vea, the Derek Brown, like those guys have a lot of value in the league, but they got to be paired with the right people. They can't be somebody who you just say, hey, go do it all Vita Vea. There's got to be linebackers, which the Vikings have. They got to have different rush schemes around that player because, I mean, think about my favorite example. I'm sure you guys love the Pat Williams example. My favorite is Casey Hampton with the Pittsburgh Steelers back in the day. That dude would just push humanity and create so much space for everybody to work around him. So no disagreement here. And keep up with that football attitude. That's serious. You got deep in the trenches there. DJJD says, let's say the Vikings have another top 5 defense this coming year with all the quality additions. This likely improves the odds of Flores getting a head coaching opportunity. The other day you mentioned players can be considered busts when drafted in specific scheme. Does this suggest going heavy on offense in this year's draft? Guard, running back, wide receiver, since we know KOC is locked in for a long time instead of drafting a corner or a safety. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing when we go back to that Lewis Cine issue where he was drafted to be an Ed Donatel scheme, which is different by a million miles from what Brian Flores is. Now, I don't think he would have made it regardless, but still, I mean, Andrew Booth Jr. might even be a better example, someone who's supposed to be an off corner that's mirroring. And here's Brian Flores who wants aggressiveness. He wants you to get after guys. He wants to play up close. He wants tacklers, right? I think actually that's probably more it. He wants tacklers. He wants aggressiveness. He's going to ask you in press situations to be very aggressive. That was not necessarily Andrew Booth Jr. So fit is going to matter with players in the draft for sure. But I would not think that if Kevin O'Connell loses Brian Flores, that he is going to change the scheme. It's been so successful, and this is where I've brought up Durante Jones, who has this great history as a defensive backs coach and would probably be the next man up, or at very least someone in that tree, in that Belichick type of style thinking to replace Brian Flores, because I just don't think that Kevin O'Connell is going to see them build this defense in Flores' vision and then go, all right, let's go to the Fangio stuff. That would be too much of a change. And what you're really looking for, yes, it does matter sometimes with scheme that can blow up in your face, but what you're looking for is just talent. And they're looking for the highest talent that they can get. And that's who you draft at number 24. Yeah, it's not the tight end, or it's not a position that clearly can't get on the field. But other than that, I mean, if the best talent that you could find is Malachi Starks, you just take him. Then he'll be able to fit into whatever scheme. I mean, I think there is some of that for sure. If you are completely different on defense, zone versus man, if you were playing Detroit's defense, then you try to play the Vikings defense, they're way different and that might hurt you. But aside from that, maybe corner qualifies. There aren't that many positions that makes a huge difference for, I think. Just try to get talent. I wouldn't think too far down the road. And unfortunately, and we all know Brian Flores has more than earned the opportunity. But if you can win 14 games with the top 5 defense and talent that's only pretty good and not get a whole lot of attention, and he got a couple of interviews, was never seemingly a finalist, I just don't know if it's going to happen for Brian Flores. So I think what'll happen next year is they'll try to make him the highest paid defensive coordinator in the league, would be my guess, to stick around long term. You want that Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo type of connection. The Vikings have built it over a couple of years. It's a cheat code to not have to change schemes every year. Last question comes from Dan. Talk about some names that could be available when the Vikings pick that some other teams would want to trade up for. Names I could think of would be Jackson Dart, Colston Loveland, Agbuka, the receiver from Ohio State, many names from 24 to 34 seem about the same. So would someone on another team need? Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So, well, the way I would look at it is there's not that many that I could think of right off the top of my head from the way that mock drafts play out. Because as you said, that 24 to 34, there's a lot of very similar caliber prospects. But here's the thing we don't know. Let me do you a little Windhorst here. The thing we don't know. Who's going to drop? Somebody's going to drop. They always do. Every single year, somebody drops. And the position that I could see dropping, that's getting a lot of hype at the top, but it's a lot of questionable players, is edge rusher. There are a lot of edge rushers who you go, I can see it because he's an athletic freak, but he wasn't that productive. Or, well, he was that productive, but he went to Marshall. Or whatever. Like, there's a lot of those guys in this draft. There's also a Will Johnson who could drop. I don't think Will Campbell's going to drop now that we know his arms are long enough. Whatever. But you just don't know who that player is. And if you get around that area and there's somebody sitting out there going, the Loveland is definitely one of those names. Jackson Dart is one of those names. If the quarterback hasn't been taken yet, somebody behind him really wants it that's drafting in the second. Let's say it's the New York Giants, and they think there's another team in there that could take a quarterback. Although if he gets past Pittsburgh, I think he's falling. But I could see it. Yeah, I think you nailed a couple of the names of wide receiver, but really it's who's expected to go in the top 15 that actually starts to fall. Maybe it's an offensive tackle. Maybe it's Kelvin Banks because some people think that he's actually a guard and he starts to slide down the board. Vikings are sitting there at 24. Maybe they would take him, or maybe they would say, well, we actually like Tyler Booker. We actually like Gray Zabel. We actually like Derek Harmon or whatever. And that would be maybe another one is the defensive tackles. If someone loves Nolan or Harmon and the Vikings aren't going to take him. This draft, they're talking about it at the top like, oh, it's so boring. It's not that interesting. It's kind of everybody knows what's going to happen and not a lot of debate going on. And we're sitting here like, hey, you guys threw how many scenarios at me here? And we'll talk about 20 more. And guess what? We will as we go forward. So great questions from everybody. Again, at Matthew Coller on Twitter, a great place to reach out via direct message or send me an email, matthewcoller@gmail.com. And hit me up there and we'll get you on a fans only episode. And let me throw one more spot. Substack. There is a Substack app and Purple Insider on there. And every Friday I do a Friday mailbag. That's where I usually draw my questions from, is people who are on the Substack app who subscribe to the newsletter. So there's a bunch of different ways to connect with Purple Insider. Feel free to do so. Thanks everybody for watching/listening, and a lot more to talk about going forward. So we'll do it then. We'll see you. Football.